you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. You are listening to the Delphi case series. This is episode 8, The Most Likely Theory. And I cannot believe this has not been widely postulated. I can't believe I missed it. This is literally the most obvious, most plausible explanation for how the abduction occurred. And what happened after, of course, and the exact details after the fact of the abduction, that's unknown and heavily speculated upon. Of course, if you've checked out the previous episodes, there's inconsistencies across the board, from law enforcement reports to thermal imaging drones not picking up the heat signatures of bodies that would have been present for a good number of hours after the alleged murder took place. So a lot of issues here, but we'll be getting into the most obvious theory of the abduction. As always, if you enjoy the podcast and find it interesting, you could donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through, or you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock and manually check for updates. If you don't get the notifications, you could also peruse our ever-growing back catalog of true crime cases, paranormal encounters, conspiracies, logical analyses, and anything and everything in between, in typical Mindshock fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront. To keep awareness up in this case, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms. Awareness, of course, is what gets cases solved, cold case or not. Even more recent cases where the pressure must be maintained. Otherwise, cases like these fade into obscurity and the chance of them being solved drops substantially. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. You can also check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Alright, so what is the most likely theory? Obviously, it's been endlessly speculated on why someone would attempt to abduct two teenagers in broad daylight, and how there would probably have to be a weapon in order to maintain control over two individuals instead of one. It's very risky. One could always run away. So the chance of being caught is very high, particularly in broad daylight. So the logistics of how this could have occurred it's very, very tough. Now, of course, I suggested in the previous podcast that if there was some kind of a plot, so if this was targeted, so if one or both of the girls were targeted, it would be a lot easier to make this look like an accident, wouldn't it? They were already on a rickety bridge, just a really unsafe bridge. So how easy would it be to just walk by and push them both off? It seems that if this was some kind of a targeted crime, that would be the easiest way to do it, and it would look like an accident. Would anybody find it that surprising that teens fell off an unsafe bridge with no railings? I mean, it is really terrifying. Looking at some people walk the bridge. I mean, walking in the middle is one thing, but standing on those edges is just, it's really, really terrifying. So wouldn't that be a more likely scenario? Now, of course, if the guy or guys, there could be multiple abductors, multiple perpetrators, which actually seems more likely. But in this scenario that I'm about to go over, it's still likely, but it makes it less required, just logically. So what could have happened if he saw them filming him? He might have not wanted to be captured on video specifically pushing them, I guess, because if he's aware enough to know about apps like Snapchat, which he may or may not be, depending on the age of the guy, depending on if he's a trucker or a hunter that has nothing to do with social media or internet and has one of those old flip phones, there's still people like that today. So years ago, who knows if he knew the exact mechanics, but we would have to assume that he could have known that there was something like the cloud, right? I mean, this isn't that many years ago. Even if he didn't know about specific apps, he might have considered the possibility that it was streaming live or something like that. in which case there would be some other mechanism for control. But how would he have gotten them? Again, we have to examine the audio. So guys down the hill, most likely from two different parts of the encounter. And this theory accounts for all of that. So, people, of course, have postulated that he might have been posing as some kind of park maintenance guy or park service employee of some kind. But what if he was posing, or an actual police officer? Of course, there's speculation that this was a police officer, but so either he was pretending to be some kind of a police officer undercover maybe, or not. Now, there are local rumors that that area is known to teens and criminals, and drug deals go down in that area. So that's obviously a variable that cannot be ignored, because that could lead to other associations. I won't go down that rabbit hole for the moment. Let's just examine this particular theory, which might be the most likely theory. So either an undercover officer or someone posing as an undercover officer. And this was actually posted in a comment on one of the Mindshock previous podcasts. This theory that bridge guy told the girls they were being placed under arrest for trespassing on the bridge, and they were handcuffed. So in this scenario, he would have either had to have brandished a badge, either real or fake. If this is someone that has committed the crime before, they might have purchased some kind of a badge, a police badge, or stole one. Or if they had done prior research, and this was their first murder. And again, we don't know if this was initially planned to be murder or just assault or whatever the case may be. If you're going with the theory that this is drug related, somebody wanted to scare the girls, maybe slap them around a little bit, maybe that was the initial plan and then it got out of hand, or maybe it was murder from the outset. We don't know, obviously. The case is still unsolved. So this individual, if he's posing as an officer, and maybe he is an officer, what would get the girls to comply? So if they believed he was an officer, now maybe they did or maybe they didn't. Maybe they continued recording because, again, this isn't that many years ago. Arrests can go bad. Maybe they wanted a record of the arrest for whatever reason, whatever the case may be. People record people getting arrested all the time for safety, for record, whatever. So they may or may not have believed he was an actual officer, but if they did, or if they at least thought he might be, they would be less willing to fight back or run away at that moment. We're not talking about later during any kind of crime. We're talking about at that initial moment. If he's pretending to be an officer and telling them they're under arrest in an authoritative tone. So if it's, for example, he's walking up to them, guys, and then there's a whole bunch of conversation. He's placing them under arrest. Now he handcuffs them. Now, however much time later, down the hill, he's marching them down the hill to get arrested. Now, maybe they start questioning why they're going that way instead of the other way down the trail. Maybe he said he parked in the cemetery. Maybe he said he parked elsewhere because he's doing a stakeout and they're not supposed to be in this area. The area is being frequented by drug dealers. Whatever the case may be. Mix of truth, mix of who knows. So if he had them under control and they were handcuffed, and if the girl started recording or slipped the phone in her pocket, now he's handcuffing her, she wouldn't be able to reach the phone or turn it off anyway. So the phone would just continue recording. So with this theory, it's actually, this is probably the most plausible scenario where a sole individual can take command of two individuals, at least temporarily have them in control. Not running away, not fighting back, because if they're scared and they believe this individual is an actual police officer, and again, maybe he is, we don't know. I won't be going too far into the links with law enforcement, but if he is a police officer, now what could have happened after this? Now there's rumors abound. There's even rumors that the police know exactly what happened at which barn and why, and how this all transpired, if one of the girls was killed much earlier than the other. And again, there seem to be issues, again, with the dates of death. I went over this in the first episode. it seems strange that they can't narrow the death, again, even just based on algor mortis, which I've gone over the last 2 podcasts about the thermal imaging drone, what it would or wouldn't pick up. There's rough estimates of time, and just based on decomposition and all those things, again, in the modern age, it seems like they should have a pretty solid time of death, unless they did, and one of the girls was killed or technically the following day after midnight, and one was killed before midnight. And if this one so we don't necessarily, again, this is Mindshock. The only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. It's theoretically possible both girls were not killed in the same location as well. It's also possible one of the girls could have been severely injured and not killed, and then taken to another location with or without the other girl. Now, if there were 2 abductors, again, or 3 or 4, the plot really thickens here. And in the next episode, I'll be going more into the specific law enforcement issues and law enforcement connections with family members as well. Again, we cannot ignore FBI statistics. A missing or murdered female is a murdered female that has been met with foul play is most likely to have been killed by either significant other or a family member or someone known to her, not a stranger, not a crime of opportunity. Now, obviously, in a small fraction of cases, it is a crime of opportunity. Now, is that what happened here? It seems, with all of the inconsistencies, the flip-flopping, the sheer supposed on the surface incompetence, it makes it that much more unlikely that this was a crime of opportunity, just based on all the anomalies and things that don't add up. Of course, it's still possible. Anything is possible. But keeping all of the variables in mind, if you haven't checked out the previous Mindshock podcast on multiple points of reference, particularly in true crime cases, check that podcast out, because simply zeroing in on one point of reference and then religiously and dogmatically building a theory around a single point of reference, instead of viewing the totality of available information to make determinations or to prevent from leaping to assumptions, and then dogmatically and religiously sticking to them against all logic and reason, which we see in a lot of cases. In the Delphi case as well, particularly with people who just they just get triggered at the very notion that that the thermal imaging camera would have picked up bodies if they were there. They just go all crazy. They'll go anti-science as far as possible to deny the possibility that something was not as reported on the idiot box. But if you're doing a truly logical, objective, neutral investigation, you're of course going to be open to any theory, because your goal is the truth, not to become married to a theory and then try to prove it no matter what against all rhyme and reason. So with this theory, is this the most likely scenario? Someone impersonating a police officer. And again, impersonating a police officer is nothing new. There is a very, very long list of crimes that have occurred by someone impersonating a police officer. To think that it's completely impossible is quite silly. Now, this actually seems to be the most likely scenario that a single individual would be able to gain control over multiple victims and even get them to march willingly somewhere, at least at the beginning. Now, here's where where we really don't know what happened. At a certain point, does one of the girls run off, or does it go bad when they realize, if there's a second perpetrator? Because what are the options? If it's a single perpetrator, would he assault them then and there, even if they're handcuffed? Because you can still run while handcuffed. So it's strange. It seems that if there was a second or third perpetrator, if the girls saw the second or third perpetrator, maybe they even knew the second or third perpetrator, and then the real plan started becoming apparent that something was wrong and this was not an actual arrest. And then that's when something weird happened. That's when one or both of the girls maybe tried to fight or run, whatever the case may be. But in this scenario, he didn't even necessarily have to brandish the gun. If he brandished a badge and spoke with authority, would they automatically call a bluff or assume he's not an officer? Because if he's already pulling, these are teenage girls, if he's already pulling out the handcuffs and telling them to turn around to be handcuffed, would they resist arrest, or even the possibility that he's not an officer? Would they chance resisting arrest if they weren't sure he was an officer? Of course, if he actually was an officer and they knew the officer, that's one thing, but who knows? But it seems that having a weapon wouldn't even necessarily be 100% required if he has the handcuffs, and if he's authoritative enough in his approach and demeanor. Again, maybe this is an actual real cop or a former cop. Maybe it's a former police officer. Either way, if he was able to get them to go willingly, and again, listen to the audio again, and imagine a scenario where someone is going to impersonate a police officer, going to say, guys, and then whatever he was saying, what are you doing here? This bridge is dangerous. You're not supposed to be here. This is a trespassing situation. He's like, I'm going to have to arrest you. I'm going to have to take you in. Maybe he even downplays it. Maybe say, it's no big deal. Your parents will have to come pick you up. Maybe we won't even file charges, but this is all a formality. I'm going to have to take you to the station. Maybe he sets it up like that, and then he says, down the hill. And they go down the hill. They're already handcuffed. Can someone think of a better scenario than that? Because it seems like, and I can't take credit for that scenario, these are people online either speculating themselves or people possibly who have heard rumors that obviously supposedly the tape or portions of the tape, more than have been released, were played for the family. So the family would know more than they have said, and either a family member told someone else, or however this got leaked, this theory, if this is true, if this is what they know is known to have happened. If this is not true, then it didn't happen. But is there a better theory someone can think of? And regardless of what theory it is, the tape would reveal it, would it not? So if they released more of the audio, now obviously releasing the audio of the actual crime in progress, that's obviously, that would be very, very disturbing, and a lot of people would understand why they would not want to release that unless there's a very specific clue or a catchphrase or something on there that could help solve the crime. There's really no reason to release it. But in the dialogue prior, I mean, it's very strange that they just didn't release. I mean, there's got to be at least, 30 seconds before any kind of violent criminal activity takes place, right? Even 20 seconds at least, if not minutes. So it seems strange why they wouldn't release it. Now, is it possible this is an actual police officer and he identified himself, and that's why they didn't release it? And they know? Or is it someone impersonating an actual police officer, and for whatever reason they didn't want that released for whatever, I don't know, they didn't want to open that can of worms because let's say they know it's not the officer that the guy was impersonating. But to have to explain the whole thing, they didn't want to do it, which is of course bizarre because do you want the case solved or not? It just seems really strange that they're not releasing even 20, 30 more seconds before the down the hill portion. Because is it really likely some guy just randomly walked up, pointed a gun, and said, guys, down the hill, and they went down the hill? And even if that's the case, there's still at least a couple more seconds there. There's still more seconds of the audio regardless of what it is. Because I don't think law enforcement has said that the assault took place on the bridge, in which case there would be more audio. Also in these comments, this person of interest was part of the search party and a member of the Delphi community. So this, of course, has all been theorized in the past as well. So if this individual was posing as an officer or an actual officer, then was involved in the search. Now, obviously, I went over ad nauseum at this point Leesenby's decision to officially call off the search for whatever reason. Again, did someone tell him something? Did he get information? Whatever the case may be, he called it off. Now, of course, family members and certain police officers stayed to search. So nobody left at whatever time they called off the search in the evening. They stayed through most of the night. But at around, I don't know, whatever the time is, there were 2 or 3 hours, the dark hours. If you haven't checked out that podcast, that's where this scenario is gone over, where there was a period of time, even if certain individuals were searching the entire time with no break, they can't cover every inch of the place. So if somebody could have, obviously it was risky. Doing anything is risky. So to say that, oh, that's too risky, it didn't happen. I mean, any abduction in broad daylight is risky. Abducting 2 people at one time is risky. So obviously this individual is willing to take risks. Now, to magically pretend, to go to fairy tale land and hallucinate, to know the exact line of risk someone who you don't even know is willing to take, I mean, that's the kind of silly nonsense that keeps cases from being solved. And if we're really thinking outside the box, it's possible that the individual that, if it was if it was whatever, 1, 2, or 3 individuals, it's possible the person that moved the bodies to the scene was not the person that killed them. So it might not even be the same person taking this risk. And then it does seem weird to bring them to that location unless they're trying to frame Ron Logan, the owner of the property. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into these theories. I'll be going over connections between people and law enforcement in the next few episodes, but again, it's just the simple notion, if you're trying to frame somebody, if there's something local going on, drug dealers, police, whatever, corruption of some kind, family feuds, multiple individuals involved, if for whatever reason somebody wants to frame Ron Logan, would they bring the bodies to the scene? Now, these abductors have already committed murder or accessory to murder. At this point, what's staging bodies, especially if they were part of the search and they kind of knew where everybody was? If they stayed with the search, again, I don't think law enforcement have looked at every single person's phone records that was part of the search party, or did they? If they did, would there be very interesting texts or phone calls? Because if 1 or 2, however many perpetrators, if one of them is part of the search party and they kind of know where everybody is at, if they went over Ron Logan's initially, didn't find anything, and then moved to further trails, and then they knew for certain that nobody was there, and if they're transporting the bodies with maybe an ATV and a deer sled or something of that nature, they could have zipped, and there's ATV noise in the background anyway of people searching farther trails. It wouldn't be that out of the ordinary to hear more ATV noises when there's already ATVs around searching. So yes, obviously still very, very risky. But if a member of the search party who was involved, if he's, let's say, standing watch, if they have 1 or 2 people standing watch nearby, and they know where they're coming from to put the bodies at the crime scene, again, it's doable. I'm not going to say it's likely or unlikely, but it's clearly doable. So that's the main point there. So this podcast was just to address this theory of impersonating a police officer, and the relative ease compared to pretty much any other theory that's been proposed, in which the relative ease to which one can control more than one individual by simply posing as a police officer, or being a police officer, and handcuffing the individuals, placing them under arrest. Now they're technically under arrest and they should comply unless they're going to resist. Would 2 teenage girls resist arrest? Even if they had maybe a suspicion that this guy wasn't really a police officer. Let's say they did. Again, whether he was or he wasn't, maybe he was an undercover police officer and they had a suspicion that he wasn't. Regardless, that's irrelevant. Even if they had an inkling that this guy was either not a police officer or was out to harm them, maybe they believed he was a police officer, but they thought, whether he was or he wasn't, but they thought the arrest was just, something was off about it. Would you really get arrested for trespassing? Maybe. I mean, it depends. I don't know, but the point is, even if they suspected something was off, what would they do? Because if he's kind of talking fast and ordering them around, saying, turn around, handcuff, we're going to handcuff you, they might say, oh, well, we need to call our parents. And he's going to say, oh, well, I'm just going to take you down to the station. You call your parents, they'll come get you. What are they going to say to that? They're going to resist arrest and try to call their parents anyway. I mean, there's really not a lot of options there. And that's why this scenario seems to make the most sense out of any other scenario proposed thus far on how this abduction was initiated. And then what happened after is, of course, way too many variables to go over. So plenty more to come, particularly in the law enforcement corruption angle and family connections. There's just so much to go over with this case, which should have been solved already, of course. This is, there's just so many anomalies to go over. I don't know why people think this is just a standard case that just was bungled or couldn't be solved for some reason. There seems to be a lot of information and a lot of evidence, and yet it remains unsolved. And the way law enforcement is handling the investigation also seems to be really bizarre and doesn't really match up other investigations and abductions. So again, we're looking at the totality of information available to make any kind of decisions or to prevent from jumping to these assumptions and then clinging to them dogmatically and religiously for some reason. Hope you guys found another edition of Mindshock True Crime informative and thought-provoking. If you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you're allowed your device to have those notifications come through. Like this podcast, share it across social media platforms to keep the awareness up, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.